to As Goes Wisconsin. I'm Kristen Bry. She is Jane Madnair. And back in May, the nonprofit organization Human Rights for Kids published a report that found that more than 7% of Wisconsinites in adult prisons are there for crimes they committed when they were 17 or younger, which is more than double the percentage nationwide and makes us only behind Louisiana. So second in the nation for how many Wisconsin adults who are prisoners are locked up for things that they did when they were under 18 as a minor. And that is shocking to me. And I wanted to have a deeper conversation about why this is a bad thing for the people who are actually incarcerated, but it's also bad for the general public. So our guest for this segment is Michael Caldwell, who is a senior lecturer and senior staff psychologist at UW-Madison's Center for Law, Society, and Justice, and has worked a lot with juvenile offenders. And so I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
So before we jump into this stat and the history of why this is true in Wisconsin, can you tell us more about your work with juvenile offenders?
I've been in this field for over 40 years, so it's a long story.
Yeah.
But, in the last 25 years or so, I've worked with the Mendota Juvenile Treatment Center. I was one of the people involved in kind of organizing that. And that was for the kids who were too unmanageable or aggressive for Ethan Allen or Lincoln Hills, kids that they couldn't really make much progress with. And so we set up a program that's a very unusual program. It's a lot of unique features. I won't try to explain the whole program, but one of the things that was required was we had to conduct outcome studies to see if the program had any effect on future violence. And somewhat to our surprise, it turns out that the program reduced the risk of future violence by half for the kids that were in the program.
Wow.
So it just underlines the fact that even kids that seem really hardcore, very, very difficult to just be around and work with, and who have committed a lot of violent crimes, they can be worked with, they can be rehabilitated under the right circumstances with the right kind of program. Now, it's a very different program than what you see in most places, and we've had a lot of people come from other states and actually many other countries looking at the program to try to see what we were doing. But the basic point is that we set up this program at the time when people were talking about super predators and kids that were violent were considered pretty much hopeless, that there wasn't much reason to think that you could rehabilitate them. And we read all that research and it seemed legitimate at the time, but we set up the program to try anyway. And it turns out that it actually did work for quite well. So it just illustrates again that the kids can be rehabilitated. They will respond if they're young.
And I'd love to hear more about the program, but we'll get back to the program itself because I want to talk about what other options exist beyond just sending 17-year-olds to prison. But why, like looking at that stat, I don't know anyone who could be like, good for us, as far as where Wisconsin lies in how many people as juveniles are still in jail as adults for things that they did. And why is that? So what is the laws in Wisconsin that have kind of created this outcome?
Yeah, back in the 90s, actually beginning in the 80s and into the 90s, we saw this huge increase in serious juvenile violence, homicides and that kind of thing. And that was part of what led to this super predator scare and all of that. Almost every state in the early 90s adopted much more restrictive laws, much more punitive laws targeting juveniles. And Wisconsin reduced the age for adult prosecution to 17 for all other purposes, like buying a bicycle or anything else. You're a child at 17 in Wisconsin, but if you're charged with a crime at 17, you're an adult. And so they were automatically put into adult court. And it also made it easier for kids to be waived into adult court from juvenile court and harder for kids who are starting out in juvenile court or in adult court to get put back into juvenile court. So a number of things. Most of the states have since that time have realized that that was a mistake. Those laws were adopted. Most of them are adopted in 95, 96, 97, around there. By that point, we were 3 or 4 years into a decline in that rate of violence, and it's continued to decline pretty steadily for the last 25 years or so. So it turns out it was most states have realized that was really not a good idea. There's been a push in Wisconsin to try to unravel some of those laws and have some more kind of common sense approaches. And some of those have had some traction, but the one law about moving kids at 17 into adult court automatically, that's still in place. And in spite of a lot of people trying to work on that, we haven't really moved that needle very much.
We're talking to Michael Caldwell, who is a senior lecturer and senior staff psychologist at UW-Madison's Center for Law and Society and Justice. And we're talking about the rate of our adult prisoners who are incarcerated for crimes that they committed as youth and why that is so high in Wisconsin. And so going back to what you just said, as far as other states have kind of reversed course, Wisconsin has not. Is there good reasons? Is there certain political actors who are clinging to this? Is it just not a priority? Or where has it been as far as like why this thing we're kind of behind the times on?
That's a tough question for me to answer.
Okay.
It's a political
Yeah.
issue. So the fact that it hasn't moved is obviously there's politics behind that. In states where things have changed, some of those states, the driving force behind the change has been conservative Republicans and people like the Koch brothers, who are aware that it's a tremendous waste of money, of tax money, to put kids into corrections for long periods of time. So they're concerned about the cost, and of course, I think they would like to have those costs reduced and the money sent back to them in tax cuts. But that's their motivation. They're recognizing that it's a poor cost benefit kind of equation. Other states like California, it's been more coming from sort of a progressive or liberal side of things, recognizing that this was a bad idea, that adolescents are still not fully developed in terms of their thinking and reasoning and all of that, and that we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot, because when you move a kid into the adult system, the chances that they'll commit future crimes once they get out goes up. So you're maybe making people feel better about this crime, but you're also creating future victims of future crimes.
And so when you're speaking about cost, as far as the waste of money, because I've heard this, I don't have the stat off the top of my head, but as far as the money spent both for juvenile and for adults on keeping people incarcerated is very, very expensive. And so in comparison to the program we were talking about that had so much success, what is the cost differentials between what it would cost for, like you said, some of the toughest kids that even Lincoln Hills was like, we don't know what to do with them, putting them through the program that you guys were doing in Mendota, versus sending them to prison?
Yeah, that was one of the questions we addressed, because the program is very expensive to get up and running, and on a regular operational basis, it costs more than double the daily cost of Ethan Allen or Lincoln Hills at the time.
Okay.
And that is much more than what it costs to have them sitting in Green Bay or Columbia, a correctional setting. But the catch is that because they made progress in the program, they stayed locked up for shorter periods of time than their matched comparison groups. And more importantly, when they're released, anything that reduces violent crime is almost bound to be cost effective.
Yeah.
Because violent offenses are just expensive. They're expensive to prosecute. They're expensive in terms of the harm done to citizens and so on. So the program actually had what's called a cost-benefit ratio of 7-to-1, which means that for every dollar invested in the program, you got about $7 back over about a 4.5 year period. So that turns out to be a return on the investment of about 135% per year. So if I could put my 401k into something like that,
get those kinds of returns, right?
Those are good returns.
Yeah.
One of the things
ahead.
about that is that those returns only go up over time. You never see it turn around where, like in the stock market, where you have ups and downs. It only goes in one direction, and it's up. So they are expensive to get started, but if they're effective, then they will definitely pay off.
And I know we've kind of touched on this, but just to explicitly ask, why is it important to treat juvenile offenders differently than adult offenders, especially when we're talking about 16, even, I mean, because honestly, being in Milwaukee right now, some of the violence that's happened over at Juneteenth, some of the random shootings that you hear happen, it's 12-year-olds, it's 13-year-olds just have guns. And so why is it so important to remember that despite the violence, they are children and they do deserve to still be treated differently than an adult who does violent crimes?
Yeah, there's several answers to that too. There's kind of the moral human rights argument that carries a lot of weight in European countries and Canada and the like. Maybe not so much in the U.S. There's the practical question of what's the most effective way to handle this kid so that his chances of committing future crime or having future problems is reduced, because those problems also end up costing society in a number of different ways. It creates victims of crime, even if the person just becomes homeless or drug addicted because those issues weren't addressed. That still costs society quite a bit. So the practical part is actually what tends to carry the day in these changes, because, well, as I say, it's a waste of energy, a waste of time and money.
And so, as far as beyond the program that you're working in, like, is there other preventative programs that are available? But as far as until this law is changed and there is more bipartisan agreement that 17-year-olds shouldn't just automatically be tried as adults, what are other policies or programs that are trying to curb this in Wisconsin?
Yeah, by far the most effective programs are the programs that are done in the community, and are prevention programs. Programs that work in schools. So working with the kid. We actually know a lot about what causes kids to get into a bad space and to do violent crimes. And so way before that happens, you can work with the kids in school settings and community settings, and do a lot of work on prevention. And then once a kid starts to get into some trouble, there are a lot of treatment programs or rehabilitation programs that have demonstrated high levels of effectiveness delivered in the family home, in the community. That's definitely the most cost-effective way to address the issue. Now, you'll treat a lot of kids who probably would never turn out to be severe, criminals, but you will head off a lot of problems too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for shedding more light on this. This is that stat just caught my eye. So I'm so happy we got to have you on the show today. Thank you for your time. And Michael Caldwell, once again, is a senior lecturer and senior staff psychologist at UW-Madison's Center for Law, Society, and Justice. Thank you for joining us today.
I was happy to be here. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
All right. When we come back, it is the anniversary of Woodstock. So we have a little bit of trivia. If you want to play, 844-967-2789. We'll be right back.